Elias Kane walked through the grand halls of the Imperial Nexus, the massive space station orbiting an uncharted planet on the fringes of the Galactic Empire's domain. His steps were measured, confident, a perfect contrast to the nervous energy radiating from the alien diplomats flanking him. He could hear their whispered comments, their sneers barely concealed behind their alien features. Humanity, to them, was a new player in the galactic game, insignificant and expendable. The Galactic Empire, an ancient and powerful force, had little respect for his race. And yet, here he was, representing Earth in an attempt to broker peace on the Empire's terms. Despite their condescension, Elias held his head high. His face, though ordinary, hid a world of secrets. To the Empire, he was nothing more than a lowly diplomat sent by the Terran Union. But beneath the polished exterior of this so-called peaceful envoy was Agent Elias Kane, a name whispered only in the darkest corners of military intelligence. His true role, the one no one in this room knew, was far from diplomatic. He was Earth's deadliest weapon, a covert operative sent to infiltrate and gather critical intelligence from the heart of the Empire. As the alien delegates seated themselves, Kane couldn't help but notice the undercurrent of tension. The Empire had arranged this summit to resolve territorial disputes, a move that on the surface seemed innocent enough. But Kane's briefing before departure had hinted at something much darker lurking beneath the surface, a plot to eradicate humanity before they could rise as a true galactic power. Kane wasn't here to negotiate a peace treaty. He was here to prevent the war that was being planned against Earth. As the conversation began, Kane offered his best diplomatic smile, nodding at the dignitaries as they exchanged pleasantries in their varied alien tongues. He didn't understand most of it, but he didn't need to. His role was simple: be seen, be heard, and most importantly, stay alive long enough to gather the information he needed. But something felt off. It wasn't just the subtle looks of disdain from the alien leaders, nor the occasional glance that the more powerful beings in the room exchanged when they thought no one was watching. It was the quiet buzz in the back of his mind, his instincts telling him that something was wrong. His hand grazed the hidden pocket on his coat, feeling the cold metal of his concealed pistol, his only guarantee that, should the situation devolve, he would be able to escape. He had trained for this moment, anticipated it in countless simulations, but still, the fear gnawed at him. The Imperial officers stationed around the room subtly adjusted their postures, a faint signal that something had changed. He noticed them watching him more intently, the weight of their gaze more than just the usual surveillance. He had become the focus of their attention. Kane's grip tightened, and he could almost hear the whisper in his mind. This is it. He knew the Galactic Empire would never allow a human, especially one as capable as him, to walk freely in their halls. He had been sent not as a diplomat, but as a target, a scapegoat to be eliminated in the name of maintaining the Empire's dominance. And yet, they didn't realize that Kane was ready for them. The Empire had underestimated humanity before. Now they were about to see the true cost of that mistake. His calm demeanor masked a storm brewing beneath the surface. Kane's mind raced through every possible escape route, every contingency plan, every weapon at his disposal. He didn't need to act yet, but he had to be ready. He could feel it now. The moment of betrayal was coming, and the enemy had no idea who they were dealing with. They thought him a harmless diplomat. What they didn't know was that he was far from defenseless. The tension in the room was palpable, but Kane remained unflinching, even as his heart beat with the kind of focused intensity that had made him legendary in Earth's covert operations. The alien diplomats, who had so openly mocked humanity as weak, were about to learn just how wrong they were. And Kane would be the one to deliver that lesson. Behind the guise of a soft-spoken negotiator, Kane had prepared for war. He knew the Empire's plans to invade Earth, plans to wipe out his people before they could threaten the galactic order. But the Empire's arrogance had left them blind to the fact that Earth's greatest strength lay in its unpredictability, its refusal to bow before any power, no matter how vast. Kane's mission wasn't just about survival. It was about sending a message. They had attacked the wrong human. As the Imperial ambassadors began to argue among themselves, discussing the terms of the supposed peace treaty, Kane felt the tension begin to rise. His instincts were sharper now, every nerve in his body alert. He couldn't let his guard down. They would come for him soon, and when they did, he would be ready. A shadow moved in the corner of his eye. Kane didn't flinch. He had expected this. Someone in the room had been watching him too closely. Someone who had known, just as he had, that this meeting was a trap. His fingers hovered over his coat, a barely perceptible motion, as he prepared for what was to come. The minutes stretched on like hours, the weight of the moment hanging thick in the air. Finally, the doors to the meeting hall slid shut, and the atmosphere shifted. It was now or never. Kane's breath slowed, his mind locking into the calculated precision of a professional. His role as a diplomat was over. What came next would be far more complicated. They had made the mistake of underestimating humanity, but Kane was ready to show them why that was a fatal error. The Empire, in its arrogance, thought it could wipe out the human race before it ever had a chance. But they hadn't reckoned with the true strength of humanity. And Elias Kane would prove that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, humans were not to be trifled with. The game had begun, and this time, humanity would be the one to control the board. The moment the door slid shut behind him, Elias Kane knew. They were coming. He had anticipated it, of course. The entire setup was a trap. The alien diplomats had played their part perfectly, pretending to engage in diplomatic talks while secretly waiting for the signal. That signal had arrived the second Kane stepped into this room. The trap had been set, and now it was time to spring it. Kane didn't flinch as he heard the faint click of a weapon being primed just outside the door. His hand was already on the hidden compartment of his coat, feeling the reassuring coolness of his concealed gun. The weapon was human-made, small but deadly, a perfect tool for someone who needed to end a life quickly and without notice. He had trained for this moment for years, preparing himself for exactly this type of confrontation. The Empire believed they were sending mere assassins to take him out, but they had no idea what they were up against. He didn't waste a second. The first assassin came through the door with a blade drawn, moving with the silent efficiency of someone who had killed before. He was fast, but not fast enough. Kane had already moved, stepping aside and slamming his elbow into the back of the assailant's neck, knocking him out cold before he even had the chance to register what had happened. The assassin crumpled to the floor, his weapon falling from his grasp with a dull thud. Before Kane could even process what was happening, another attacker emerged from the shadows. This one with a plasma rifle, the kind favored by Imperial troops for its precision. Kane's eyes flicked to the weapon, calculating the trajectory in a fraction of a second. The rifle was already charging up, but Kane had already reached for his gun. He was quicker. The shot rang out, a clean, precise hit to the attacker's shoulder, rendering the rifle useless. The man barely had time to scream before Kane was on him, disarming him in a swift motion and using his own body weight to throw him across the room. The attacker hit the wall with a sickening thud, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Kane didn't stop to watch. He wasn't here to enjoy the fight. The room was small, and he knew there would be more coming. He moved quickly, grabbing the plasma rifle from the downed attacker, assessing its weight and balance as he ran toward the corner of the room where he could take cover. The weapon was unfamiliar, but he had trained with a variety of alien technology over the years. His mind calculated the settings as he adjusted the rifle's power, ready to use it against any others who dared enter. A third assassin, this one much more cautious, appeared at the door, peering into the room. Kane didn't give him the chance to get comfortable. He raised the plasma rifle, taking a quick shot that grazed the edge of the doorframe, sending the man scrambling for cover. The sound of the shot echoed, loud enough to send a shockwave through the space station's metal walls. This time, Kane wasn't wasting any more time playing games. He moved swiftly, closing the distance between him and the last remaining threat. The final assassin, a hulking figure covered in dark armor, was already preparing his own weapon, a massive energy sword capable of cutting through even the toughest material. He was strong, likely trained to fight with raw power, but Kane had one advantage: speed. The armored figure swung the sword in a wide arc, and Kane ducked, narrowly avoiding the lethal blade. He twisted, slamming his knee into the assassin's midsection, knocking the wind out of him. The man staggered back, but Kane was already on him, twisting the sword out of his hands and sending it skidding across the floor. With the fight now in his control, Kane's movements became surgical. He efficiently neutralized the remaining assailants one by one, using the environment to his advantage, breaking bones, applying pressure where it would disable, not kill. He wasn't here to start a massacre. He was here to survive, to complete his mission. The last thing the Empire needed was to realize they had underestimated humanity. In a matter of minutes, the would-be assassins were either unconscious or incapacitated, leaving Kane alone in the room with nothing but the echo of his own steady breathing. The tension of the fight drained from his body, but his mind remained sharp. He couldn't afford to let his guard down yet. The mission wasn't over. Far from it. He quickly began his work, using the bodies of the incapacitated assailants to his advantage. He planted the plasma rifle in a way that suggested the attackers had turned on each other. The Empire had always relied on secrecy and manipulation, and Kane knew that his survival depended on leaving them with no way to trace this back to him. Before he left, he took a moment to upload a virus into the Empire's secure communications network, a quiet sabotage that would cripple their intelligence for days. As he completed the hack, his eyes scanned the room, noting the bloodstains, the signs of struggle. It wouldn't take long before the station's commanders realized something had gone wrong. The key now was to leave no trace of his true intentions. Kane had never been one to waste time. The fight had been necessary, but it was just a distraction. The real work lay ahead, and he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. He had a mission to complete, and the Empire's attempts to end his life would only serve to push him closer to the goal. As he moved toward the exit, Kane's mind remained focused. The diplomats had underestimated humanity's ability to fight, to survive, to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. They hadn't expected him to be prepared, to outwit them at every turn. They had thought he was just a diplomat, a man of words. But that was their first mistake. Elias Kane was far more than that, and the Empire was about to learn just how dangerous a single human could be. Kane stood in the shadows, his mind working at a blistering pace. He had done what he needed to do, but now the true mission began. The Empire, in its arrogance, had no idea that the real prize wasn't his life. It was the information he had come here to obtain. His fingers hovered over the console in front of him, accessing the Empire's most secure network. The data would be stored in multiple layers of encryption, but it was nothing Kane couldn't crack. He had been trained for this, taught to break through even the most advanced security systems with ease. His eyes flickered across the terminal's interface as he bypassed each layer of protection. His heartbeat remained steady, his focus razor-sharp. He wasn't just looking for information. He was hunting for the Empire's hidden agenda, the plans they thought were too well guarded to ever reach the eyes of their enemies. They thought they could wipe out humanity before it had the chance to rise as a galactic power, but they hadn't counted on Earth's most lethal asset, its unpredictability. Kane's screen flashed briefly, and a new set of files appeared. The documents were extensive, detailing the Empire's upcoming military campaign. But there, buried beneath layers of coded language and diplomatic jargon, was the one thing Kane had hoped to find: confirmation that the Empire planned to strike Earth within the year. It was a preemptive move, designed to crush humanity before they could become a real threat. He let the information settle in his mind for only a second before he moved into action. Kane wasn't here to just gather intel. He was here to send a message. If the Empire thought they could wipe out humanity so easily, they were about to find out how wrong they were. His fingers danced across the keyboard, deploying a virus into the Empire's communication systems. The code was designed to confuse, to distort, and ultimately to paralyze their military infrastructure. The Empire would be unable to communicate with its forces, unable to coordinate attacks, for at least a few critical hours. It was a small victory, but one that would make a significant impact in the long run. Kane pulled up a map of the station, pinpointing the location of the Imperial Command Center. His path was clear. He would leave no trace of his presence, no sign that he had ever been here. As the virus spread through their systems, he made his way toward the station's central hub, where the command staff would be scrambling to regain control of their network. They would be confused, disoriented. And in that chaos, Kane would make his escape. His thoughts shifted briefly to Earth, to the people he was fighting for. He had seen the reports, the images of humanity's rapid advancement in technology, of our push to explore and expand beyond the confines of our home planet. The Empire feared humanity because of that ambition, because humanity refused to play by anyone else's rules. They thought they could end that threat before it ever became real, before humanity could challenge their iron grip on the galaxy. But Kane knew better. He knew that humanity would rise, no matter the obstacles. They would adapt, they would learn, and they would fight back. He couldn't afford to dwell on it for long. He was on a deadline. The Empire might not know it yet, but they had just made the mistake of underestimating a species that had survived against all odds. Kane's hand moved quickly, disabling the final security lock in front of him. The command center's doors slid open, revealing the chaos within. Imperial officers and analysts were scrambling, their voices rising in frustration as they realized their communications had been severed. Kane moved with purpose, stepping into the room as though he belonged, his every action calculated to maintain the illusion of diplomacy. The officers in the room were too distracted by their malfunctioning systems to notice him at first. Kane observed them, studying their reactions. They weren't just concerned about the disruption. There was a palpable fear in the air, something deeper, something more dangerous. These men and women were more than just bureaucrats. They were warriors, tasked with overseeing the Empire's most crucial operations. And now, they were floundering. Kane's mind raced as he processed everything in front of him. The Empire's plans to invade Earth had been more thorough than he expected, but that only made his task more important. He had to act quickly before they could recover. His goal was simple: leave the station with the information he had gathered, plant evidence of an internal conspiracy that would divert attention from the humans, and make sure no one knew the true source of the disruption. He watched as an officer paced near the terminal, his frustration mounting. The officer was unaware that Kane was already moving, positioning himself behind a stack of crates. The chaos unfolding before them was his opportunity to act. The officers had no idea that the agent who had infiltrated their station was the very person they had been planning to eliminate. They were too busy trying to regain control of their systems, too absorbed in their own panic. Kane's plan was in motion. He dropped a small device onto the floor, a signal jammer that would make it impossible for any communications to be traced back to him. The device would appear as though it had malfunctioned, a minor glitch in the system. Meanwhile, his presence would be masked, his every move camouflaged by the rising tide of disorder. The officers continued to scramble, oblivious to the fact that the real threat was already inside their command center. Kane made his way to the central terminal, his fingers flying across the console. He planted the false intelligence, a fabrication that would implicate one of the Empire's rival species in the sabotage. By the time they realized what had happened, it would be too late. The conspiracy would be in motion, and their focus would shift away from Earth, buying humanity the time it needed to prepare. As the last file transferred, Kane took one final look at the room, assessing the damage. The virus he had planted was already wreaking havoc on the Empire's systems, rendering their communications useless for hours. The confusion would give him just enough time to make his escape. He left the command center with the same calm demeanor he had entered with, moving swiftly through the corridors. The Empire would be left scrambling, looking for a scapegoat, never realizing that the real threat had just walked out their door. Kane's thoughts turned briefly to Earth again, and for a moment, he allowed himself a small smile. The Empire thought it could control the galaxy, but humanity had always been the wild card. They couldn't be predicted, couldn't be tamed. And Kane was about to prove that, no matter how powerful the Empire was, humanity would never be crushed. The station's corridors were eerily silent as Elias Kane moved through them, his footsteps the only sound echoing in the void. The chaos inside the command center had been perfect. The officers were still scrambling to regain control of their systems, and the fabricated evidence he planted would keep their focus elsewhere. Kane had done his part. Now it was time to leave, but there was no room for mistakes. The Empire would eventually realize what had happened, and by then, he needed to be long gone. As he moved deeper into the station, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the mission settle on his shoulders. The stakes had never been higher. The Empire had just underestimated humanity in the worst way possible. They had thought they could snuff out a species they deemed too insignificant to matter. But Kane had shown them that even the smallest spark could set a galaxy aflame. And he wasn't done yet. Kane's mind flicked back to the intel he had gathered, the hard evidence of the Empire's plans to strike Earth. He had to make sure that data reached the right hands. His superiors on Earth would need it to prepare. The military would need to mobilize, to fortify their defenses, and to strike first if necessary. But sending the data wasn't as simple as hitting send. The Empire had eyes everywhere. They would be watching every communication channel, every transmission for any sign of betrayal. It had to be done with precision. His first move was to access the station's communication array, hidden deep within the station's lower levels. It wasn't a simple task. The array was well guarded, both by the station's security personnel and by the Empire's sophisticated tracking systems. But Kane had planned for this. His training had prepared him to navigate systems like these, to mask his signature in ways that would make it nearly impossible for the Empire to trace his movements. As he descended deeper into the station's bowels, Kane thought about the moment when humanity would finally see the consequences of the Empire's actions. Earth had always been underestimated, and every attempt to suppress it had only made it stronger. Humanity had survived wars, disasters, and invasions, each time emerging more resilient. This wouldn't be the first time the human race had faced extinction, but it would be the last time they did so passively. Reaching the communications array, Kane immediately set to work. His fingers moved across the console with precision, cracking the array's encryption protocols and bypassing the station's surveillance systems. The station's internal security would be looking for an intruder, but they would never find him. Kane's signature was already buried beneath layers of false data, rerouted through several decoy systems. He was a ghost in their network. The data he had gathered was critical. It was proof of the Empire's plans, the exact timetable for their invasion. It outlined the fleet movements, the strategies, the resources they intended to deploy, all the information Kane's superiors needed to prevent the attack. But sending it out would be the challenge. The communication channels were heavily guarded, monitored by the Empire's best security forces. One wrong move, one misstep, and the entire operation would be compromised. Kane's plan was simple: use the Empire's own systems against them. The same encryption protocols that protected their communications could be turned on them, masking the data as a routine transmission. He would send the critical files through a channel that the Empire would assume was legitimate, a normal report that wouldn't raise any suspicion. It was a gamble, but it was the only way. He inserted the data, watching the transmission progress on the screen. It was going smoothly, the encryption process working as expected. He felt a small flicker of hope, the weight of his mission momentarily lifting. But that hope was short-lived. The station's alarms blared suddenly, the high-pitched screech filling the air. Kane's heart skipped a beat. The Empire had detected something. Whether it was a glitch in the system or a more deliberate breach didn't matter. What mattered was that they were onto him. Kane's mind went into overdrive. The transmission was still processing, but it was far from complete. He couldn't let them trace it back to him. He quickly severed the connection to the network, initiating a system-wide shutdown that would make it impossible to track the data to its source. It was a risky move, one that could shut down the entire station if he wasn't careful, but he had no choice. The Empire couldn't find out what he had done. The console blinked, and the screen went black. For a moment, he thought he had failed, but then the transmission completed. The data was sent. The virus he'd planted earlier had done its job, causing just enough confusion to cover his tracks. The Empire would think the transmission was routine, but Earth would receive the information. Kane had done what he came here to do, but his time was running out. The alarms were getting louder now, the sound echoing through the halls of the station. He had to move fast. As he turned to leave, he heard the sound of footsteps, shouts growing closer. The Empire had already initiated a lockdown. His escape route was closing, and he had no time to waste. Kane's training kicked in. He knew the layout of the station like the back of his hand. He had studied every corridor, every exit. The nearest emergency hatch was only a few levels away. He sprinted through the station's winding hallways, his every movement calculated to keep him out of sight. The security forces would be out in full force by now, hunting for him, and Kane couldn't afford to be caught. Not when the information he carried could change the course of history. He reached the hatch and keyed in the emergency override. The door slid open, revealing the vacuum of space beyond. The station's docking bay was a labyrinth of ships and maintenance areas, all designed for quick access. Kane had already arranged for his escape. His ship was waiting, concealed within the maze of cargo containers, ready to take him far away from the Empire's reach. But just as he stepped toward the exit, a figure appeared in his path. It was an Imperial officer, tall and imposing, a captain who had clearly come to stop him. The man's eyes locked onto Kane, his gaze filled with a mixture of disbelief and anger. He knew what Kane had done. He knew that the Empire had just lost its grip on humanity. Kane didn't hesitate. The officer moved to raise his weapon, but Kane was faster. He drew his sidearm in a fluid motion, taking the officer down in a single, precise shot. The captain crumpled to the floor, his weapon falling from his grasp. Kane moved past him, his focus unwavering. The Empire had lost. They just didn't know it yet. Kane's ship was waiting. He climbed aboard, initiated the launch sequence, and took off, leaving the station behind. The Empire had been attacked by their own complacency, by their failure to recognize the true threat humanity posed. And now the message had been sent. Earth would be ready. Humanity would rise. As the station disappeared from view, Kane allowed himself a small, satisfied breath. The mission was complete. The Empire had learned the hard way that no one, no matter how powerful, could ever underestimate humanity again.